Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to getting truly informed on complex topics. We dive into the dense stuff, the research, the frameworks, the white papers, and pull out what you really need to know. And today, we're tackling something pretty critical and definitely innovative. We're going deep on an auditable framework. Basically, a structured way to bring artificial intelligence into professional military education, PME.
That's right. And it's important to stress this isn't science fiction, robots taking command or anything like that. The source material we're looking at lays out a very specific architecture. The goal is to make AI what they call a verifiable learning partner, right there in the classroom.
A verifiable learning partner. Okay.
Yeah, it's all about disciplined learning, structured learning, not autonomous AI making battlefield decisions. Definitely not that.
Okay, good to clarify that up front.
Yeah.
So let's dig in immediately because, as you said, this framework is trying to solve a really deep-seated problem, something that's been a headache in military education for, well, decades. What is that core challenge?
It really boils down to what the sources call a significant and persistent communication gap. It's quite fundamental.
A communication gap between who?
Well, on one side, you've got your academic military scholars, the researchers, the think tanks. They tend to operate in a very analytical language, often quite theoretical. They're building these complex models, of decision-making, conflict dynamics.
Well, it's the high-level strategic thinking, often very abstract.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have the operational commanders, and maybe more importantly here, the PME staff, the instructors, the students. And these folks, they need practical, actionable language, operational vocabulary, teachable frameworks they can actually apply in training or in the field.
And those two languages, they don't always connect.
They often exist in completely different worlds. The language of, say, systems dynamics doesn't easily translate into the language of military doctrine or standard operating procedures.
And I imagine that's where really valuable insights from the academic side, maybe the latest research on strategy or complex systems, they just fizzle out.
That's a huge part of the problem. They often fail to make it into a commander's actual thinking process or into a lesson plan or a war game scenario because that translation is just too difficult or too time-consuming.
Or maybe it gets translated but loses something crucial along the way. Or the link back to the original research gets lost.
Precisely. And if it does get translated, there's often no clear, verifiable trail back. How do you know this new training concept is actually grounded in sound theory or approved doctrine? So this framework we're discussing proposes using AI, specifically a very constrained AI, to act as that disciplined bridge.
A disciplined bridge. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, connecting the theory and the practice.
Yeah.
And this is absolutely critical, the whole system is designed so that human accountability, human responsibility remains front and center, always.
Accountability, that seems to be the watchword here. So how does it enforce that? What's the core innovation, the process that ensures this transparency and keeps the human in charge?
It's built around a 5-stage pipeline, a very specific auditable workflow. And this is what really transforms the AI from being, some mysterious black box into a tool you can actually trust and verify. We'll definitely need to spend some time unpacking these stages because they're the heart of it. The stages are curate, then retrieve, then cite, then audit, and finally teach.
Curate, retrieve, cite, audit, teach. Okay. So that's our mission for this deep dive then, to really understand how this controlled retrieval augmented AI pipeline works, from setting up the knowledge base, the curation part, all the way through to producing instructional material that instructors and students can actually trust.
Right. So let's dive a bit deeper into that communication gap first. When we talk about academic researchers and their models, what kind of stuff are we actually talking about? Think highly technical analyses, maybe exploring optimal resource allocation under conditions of deep uncertainty, or modeling the nonlinear dynamics of an insurgency. It's dense, specialized material, often published in academic journals, not exactly light reading.
Okay. And then the PME instructors on the other side. They're often, retired commanders, subject matter experts?
Typically, yes. Highly experienced practitioners. And their job is to instill practical skills and knowledge. Things like joint operational planning, strategic communication, logistics management, ethical leadership. Their focus is squarely on the how and the what of military operations, maybe less on the deep philosophical why.
So the problem isn't that one side is smarter or better than the other?
Not at all. It's a problem of translational utility. That's the term the framework uses. How do you make the insights from that dense academic model useful and accessible for the instructor teaching battlefield tactics? The framework identifies that, look, without a dedicated tool like this constrained AI, the entire burden of that translation falls on the individual instructor.
And they might not have the time or maybe even the specific analytical background to really connect that abstract model back to, say, Field Manual 3 dull on operations in a verifiable way.
Exactly. They might simplify it, they might interpret it, but is that interpretation accurate? Is it grounded? That's the barrier this AI is explicitly designed to, well, not eliminate, but manage, to bridge.
Okay. Now, to really grasp the significance of this barrier, the source material does something interesting. It connects this modern communication problem back to a really classical military concept, Karl von Clausewitz's idea of friction.
Yes, Clausewitz. It's foundational thinking in military strategy. Clausewitzian friction, in essence, is why nothing in war ever goes exactly according to plan.
It's the difference between war on paper and war in reality.
Precisely. It's that inherent resistance, the gap between the neat, tidy plan and the messy, chaotic reality of execution. Traditionally, like you said, it's the mud of the battlefield.
Right, the physical stuff, broken communications, unexpected enemy actions, bad weather, troops getting lost, sheer exhaustion.
All those countless, minor, unpredictable difficulties that accumulate and just gum up the works, making execution inherently imperfect.
But the sources here are making a pretty bold argument. They're saying that friction, that fundamental resistance, hasn't gone away, but it's changed its character, especially in the modern information age. How so?
They argue that the primary locus of friction has shifted. It's moved from being mainly a physical or logistical challenge to being predominantly a cognitive one.
A cognitive challenge, okay.
We've sort of moved beyond just the mud of the battlefield, and now we're grappling with the paralyzing effects of what they call the fog of information abundance.
The fog of information abundance. That phrase really resonates. It captures the feeling perfectly. Can we break that down? What does that informational friction actually look like for, say, a commander or an analyst today?
Absolutely. Think about it this way. In Clausewitz's era, a commander's friction might be, waiting days for a dispatch rider who got lost or whose horse went lame. Information was scarce and slow.
Right. The friction was lack of information.
Today, the friction is the opposite. It's having 20 simultaneous intelligence feeds pouring in, 5 different satellite images showing slightly different things, 3 competing predictive models offering conflicting forecasts, social media buzzing with unverified reports. The friction today is having too much information, often of dubious quality, and no reliable, fast way to filter the signal from the overwhelming noise.
So it creates this analysis paralysis.
Exactly that. The sheer volume, the velocity, the variety of data. It actually impedes clear thinking and decisive action more effectively sometimes than physical obstacles ever could. You drown in data.
So the resistance isn't primarily external anymore, the terrain, the weather. It's become internal. It's the cognitive load, the mental bandwidth required just to filter, process, synthesize, and crucially trust the information you have.
Precisely. And the argument follows. If military organizations want to maintain speed, agility, effectiveness in this environment, they need new tools. Tools specifically designed to manage this cognitive friction.
And that's where the AI framework comes back in. It's designed to help manage that noise.
Yes, by its very structure, remember the curate stage, by strictly limiting the AI to only validated authoritative sources from the start, it essentially cuts out a massive amount of that potential informational glut, that noise, before it even reaches the human analyst or the student. It pre-filters the chaos.
Okay, that clarifies the connection. So this brings us back then to the core objective of this whole framework. It's about creating this transparent, auditable, retrieval-augmented AI pipeline. And the absolute non-negotiable requirement is establishing that provable, verifiable link, connecting abstract theory to established doctrine like the official joint publications or field manuals, and then directly to the actual materials used for teaching in the classroom.
The emphasis there has to be on provable, verifiable. It's not enough for the AI to generate something that sounds plausible or intelligent. Every single factual assertion, every key piece of synthesized information it produces must be traceable directly back to its origin within that curated, approved set of documents.
And that traceability, that audit trail, is what fundamentally changes the game. It shifts the relationship with AI in these high-stakes educational settings from one of maybe uncertain trust to one of verifiable confidence.
That's the goal. Building trust through transparency.
Okay, so building this verifiable bridge requires more than just clever engineering. The framework seems to be built on a pretty sophisticated conceptual foundation. It's not just about adopting a new tool. It looks like it requires updating the very language we use to think and talk about warfighting, at least in this context. The source material mentions a synthesis of three distinct domains.
That's right. It's quite an ambitious intellectual integration. It explicitly draws from, first, Clausewitzian military theory, which we've touched on. Second, complexity science or systems theory. And third, the field of knowledge management.
Okay, Clausewitz makes sense given the focus on friction. Knowledge management clearly addresses the information and documentation side of things, but complexity science. Let's pause there for a second. Clausewitz was writing in the early 19th century, describing war as this fundamentally human, messy endeavor driven by chance, politics, emotion. Isn't there a risk of sort of retrofitting modern mathematical systems theory onto his philosophical insights, creating an anachronism?
That's a really important question and a valid concern. The framework directly addresses this. The argument isn't that complexity science somehow replaces or contradicts Clausewitz. The argument is that it formalizes many of his core insights.
Formalizes them. How so?
Well, think about it. Clausewitz described war, in his famous Trinity, as this realm governed by irreducible chance, uncertainty, and powerful emotional or moral forces. He recognized its inherent nonlinearity, how small events could have huge, unpredictable consequences. That was his deep philosophical insight.
Okay, so he saw the chaos, the unpredictability.
He did. Now, what does complexity science or systems theory bring to the table? It provides a more rigorous, analytical language to describe exactly those kinds of phenomena. It gives us concepts like sensitivity to initial conditions. That's our modern formal term for the butterfly effect that Clausewitz intuitively described. It talks about emergent order, where predictable patterns can arise from the interaction of many unpredictable agents. It offers ways to model feedback loops, cascading effects.
So complexity science essentially provides the mathematical and conceptual toolkit to analyze the very systemic properties of war that Clausewitz identified philosophically.
Exactly. It provides a structure, a vocabulary for dealing with that inherent nonlinearity and uncertainty. This synthesis is crucial because it allows the AI, when analyzing the curated doctrine, to look for patterns related to these systems dynamics, not just keywords.
That makes the connection much clearer. It's not forcing Clausewitz into a modern box, but using modern tools to better understand the phenomena he described.
Okay. Now, within that complex system of war, there's still that crucial human element. The sources put a lot of emphasis on something called tacit knowledge.
Ah, yes, tacit knowledge. This is absolutely central. It's basically the unwritten gold of professional experience.
The stuff you can't learn from a book.
Pretty much. It's what a seasoned commander knows intuitively. That feel for a situation, the ability to read subtle cues, understanding the cultural nuances, judging troop morale, is all that knowledge built up over years of practice. But it's incredibly hard, maybe impossible, to fully capture in an explicit manual or a doctrinal checklist.
Right. You know it when you see it, but you can't easily write it down.
That's the essence of it. And the source material argues very strongly that this tacit knowledge is the vital link. It's the bridge between abstract theory, like those complex models we talked about, and actual effective practical judgment, making the right call under pressure in the real world. So, if this framework aims to improve PME, to train better commanders, it absolutely must find a way to respect and somehow engage with that tacit knowledge. It can't just replace it with AI-generated analysis.
Precisely. The AI can support, it can illuminate, but it cannot replicate that deep professional intuition. And to make this whole integration work to connect Clausewitz, complexity, knowledge management, and tacit knowledge in a way an AI can process and an instructor can teach, the framework has to do some careful translation work. It needs to take these classical, sometimes philosophical concepts and reframe them, reinterpret them into more analytical, verifiable terms. This is where we get the three key reinterpretations that are, I think, the real aha moment in the source material.
Okay, this sounds crucial. Let's break down these three conceptual reframings. First up, friction. We talked about the mud, the fog of information abundance. How is that reframed in analytical terms?
Friction is explicitly reframed as epistemic noise.
Epistemic noise. Okay, epistemic relating to knowledge, to knowing.
Exactly. So epistemic noise represents all the informational and cognitive interference within the military decision-making system. It's the bad signal quality, the conflicting intelligence reports, the overwhelming flood of data, the biases in interpretation, anything that actively hinders clear understanding and sound judgment. It's noise in the knowledge system.
Can you give me a quick, maybe non-military example of epistemic noise?
Sure. Think about trying to make a sound investment decision today. You're flooded with information news headlines, analyst reports, social media rumors, conflicting economic forecasts, maybe even deliberate misinformation. Sifting through all of that, the sheer volume, the questionable sources, the contradictory advice to find reliable information to act on, that struggle, that's dealing with epistemic noise in a financial context.
Got it. That makes it very tangible. Okay, next, reinterpretation. The inherently unpredictable nature of conflict, what Clausewitz hinted at in complexity science models, non-linearity. How is that reframed?
Non-linearity, those cascading, often disproportionate effects where small actions can have massive unexpected outcomes, is reframed as feedback across cognitive layers.
Feedback across cognitive layers. That sounds very systems-oriented.
It is. It provides a way to think about and potentially model how decisions or events at one level, say a tactical choice, can ripple upwards or downwards through the entire decision-making structure, from the strategic vision all the way down to individual actions and back up again. It helps trace those often unpredictable consequences, positive and negative feedback loops, as they propagate through the different levels of planning, command, and execution.
So it gives a language to track those ripple effects that Clausewitz knew were there but couldn't easily map.
That's the idea. And finally, perhaps the most subtle but important one, tacit knowledge, that unwritten expertise. How do you frame that analytically? Tacit knowledge is reframed very carefully as the bridge between explicit data and professional intuition.
The bridge. Okay, explain that.
The framework is very clear on this point. The AI's role is to work with the explicit data. It can process the manuals, analyze historical battle data, identify patterns in doctrine, cluster-related concepts. It operates on the stuff that is written down, the explicit knowledge. It can even suggest potential connections or highlight anomalies based on that data. But
the actual act of judgment remains human.
entirely, the professional intuition, the ability to look at those patterns, understand their context, weigh the intangibles, and make a seasoned judgment based on deep experience, that remains the exclusive domain of the human commander or student. The AI can help illuminate the landscape, maybe point out interesting features based on the explicit data, but the human decides which path to take. The human performs the intuitive leap across that bridge.
That's a fascinating distinction. So the AI surfaces patterns in the explicit data that might relate to areas where tacit knowledge is important, but it doesn't try to be tacitly knowledgeable itself.
Exactly, it respects that boundary. And what's really interesting here is that the entire framework almost mandates this updated way of thinking. It's not just, here's a new AI tool. It's to use this tool safely and effectively in this high-stakes environment, we need to adopt this more nuanced, systems-aware, and human-centric understanding of concepts like friction, nonlinearity, and expertise. The philosophy and the technology have to evolve together.
Okay, so we've established the philosophical challenge, the communication gap, the evolving nature of friction, and the conceptual reframing needed to address it. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts, the engineering solution, that 5-stage workflow you mentioned earlier.
Right. This is the practical core of the proposal. The entire methodology, curate, retrieve, cite, audit, teach, is built around one central principle: enforcing auditable knowledge generation. You might hear the term retrieval augmented generation, or RBARC, used in the broader AI world. This framework takes that concept but structures it into a very disciplined, step-by-step workflow, one that's specifically designed to align with the accountability norms you'd expect in military pedagogy.
So it's RE, but with strict guardrails, a deliberate method to constrain the AI, stop it from just making things up or going off BIST.
Precisely. It severely limits the AI's tendency to hallucinate or generate plausible-sounding nonsense, which is a major concern with more open-ended AI systems, especially in high-stakes domains.
Makes sense. Okay, let's walk through the stages. Stage 1, curate. This is about building the knowledge base, the corpus. Why is this the absolute foundation, and why the emphasis on it being both closed and versioned?
It's the foundation because everything else flows from it. The closed part is crucial.
Ah.
It means the AI only has access to the information inside the specific pre-approved collection of documents. It cannot reach out to the open internet. It can't pull in random blogs or unverified sources.
So that immediately mitigates the risk of the AI learning from or citing bad information. It fences it in from the start.
Exactly. It dramatically reduces the attack surface for misinformation or factual errors right at the input stage. Now, the version part is just as important, especially in a military context.
Why version?
Because military doctrine isn't static. Field manuals get updated, joint publications are revised based on new lessons learned or changing threats. Technology evolves.
Oh, so if a new version of, say, FM30 operations comes out, the entire corpus needs to reflect that. It needs a date stamp, essentially.
Precisely. The corpus has to be under strict version control. If the AI generates an analysis or a lesson plan component, the system must record which specific version of the doctrine corpus was based on. Version 3.1 of FM30, dated January 2024, for example.
And that ensures what? Reliability?
Reliability, yes, but critically, also reproducibility.
Yeah.
If there's ever a question about why the AI suggested a certain approach, or if an analysis needs to be reviewed later, you can go back and know exactly which set of rules, which specific documents and versions the AI was operating under at that time. This is fundamental for institutional learning, for after-action reviews, even for potential investigations.
Okay, so what kind of documents actually go into this carefully curated, versioned corpus?
We're talking specific high-stakes authoritative sources. Things like current official military doctrine, the foundational texts like FM30 on operations, JP30 on joint operations, maybe specific service doctrines.
Yeah.
Also, potentially, selected historical accounts of campaigns or battles that are considered canonical examples, and foundational military theory Clausewitz, maybe Sun Tzu, Boyd texts that have been vetted and are considered essential reading. It's all about institutional authority.
So a tightly controlled library of approved knowledge. That leads us logically to the second stage, retrieve. Once you have this fenced-in, versioned library, how does the system ensure the AI only pulls out the relevant pieces of information for a specific query without just grabbing everything or introducing noise?
This is where the retrieval augmented part gets technical, but the principle is clear. The AI's access, even within the closed corpus, is further restricted. It uses primarily two mechanisms that work together: semantic search and chunk control.
Okay, let's define those clearly for everyone. Semantic search, what's that doing differently than just a standard keyword search?
Semantic search is much smarter. Instead of just looking for exact keyword matches like the words tank deployment, it tries to understand the underlying meaning or concept behind the user's query. It can find relevant passages even if they use slightly different terminology or phrasing, as long as the core idea is related. This is really vital for connecting, say, an abstract theoretical concept like nonlinearity to a specific doctrinal passage discussing, perhaps, the fragility of supply chains. Even if the word nonlinearity never appears in that passage, it finds conceptual links.
Okay, so it's searching for meaning, not just words. What about the second mechanism, chunk control? You mentioned this is key to preventing AI hallucination. How does that work?
It's fundamental. Large documents, like a full field manual, are often too much information for an AI to process accurately in one go when generating a specific answer. So before the AI even sees them, these documents are broken down into much smaller, manageable segments or chunks, maybe a paragraph or a few paragraphs, each focused on a specific point.
Little digestible pieces.
Exactly. When a user asks a question, the semantic search identifies the most relevant chunks from across the corpus. Then only those specific small, verified snippets of text are passed to the AI model as context to generate its answer.
Ah, I see. So by feeding the AI only these tiny, highly relevant, pre-verified fragments of information related to the query.
You dramatically reduce the space it has to invent facts or make broad, unsupported logical leaps. It's forced to base its answer directly on the specific, verified textual evidence provided in those small chunks. It constrains the generation process very tightly.
Okay. Stage 1, curate builds the fence. Stage 2, retrieve ensures the AI only gets small, verified bytes of info from inside the fence relevant to the query. That seems to lead directly to stage 3, cite.
Absolutely. The cite stage enforces what the framework calls absolute source fidelity. It's a non-negotiable requirement for every single factual claim or substantive assertion the AI makes in its generated output.
Every single one.
Every single one. It must produce an accompanying, verifiable, traceable citation. And this isn't just like a bibliography at the end. The citation needs to point back precisely to the specific source document within the version corpus that supports that claim. Ideally, it should point to the exact page number, paragraph number, or chunk ID.
Wow, that's the core transparency mechanism right there. So if the AI generates, say, a summary of doctrine on amphibious landings or proposes a checklist for a certain procedure.
Well, the instructor or the student must be able to click a link or follow a reference right next to that statement and see the exact passage in JP 302, version 2.1, or whichever document that backs it up.
And if it can't provide that specific verifiable citation for a claim it makes,
then that claim is considered invalid. It should make it through the process. The output is essentially untrustworthy without that verifiable link. Which brings us, naturally, to the critical human-in-the-loop stage. Stage 4, Audit.
The human check. This sounds crucial, but maybe also laborious.
It is crucial, and yes, it requires dedicated human effort. The audit stage is mandatory. It's the quality control step that verifies the integrity of the retrieve and cite stages. This is where human experts step in. The system must maintain detailed review logs that trace every single claim generated by the AI back to its cited source document within the versioned corpus. A human reviews this trail.
Okay, who typically does this auditing, and what exactly are they looking for? It's not just checking if the citation exists, right?
Right. The auditing would typically be done by experienced PME instructors, subject matter experts, maybe even dedicated curriculum developers. They're looking for several key things. First, basic citation accuracy. Does the cited passage actually support the claim the AI made? Sometimes an AI might cite a source that's only tangentially related or even contradictory. Second, logical fidelity. Did the AI make a sound logical connection between different pieces of cited information? Or did it make an unwarranted leap, synthesizing ideas in a way that isn't actually supported by the texts when read together? And third, doctrinal alignment or coherence. Even if individual statements are correctly cited, does the overall synthesized output perhaps subtly violate a larger overarching doctrinal principle or strategic guideline? Does it fit the broader context?
So they're checking the citation, the logic of the synthesis, and the overall coherence with established principles.
Yes. This rigorous human review creates that unimpeachable, transparent, and fully auditable trail for the AI's reasoning process. It builds institutional trust.
It's the verification of the AI synthesis work itself. And only after a human expert has gone through that audit trail, checked the citations, checked the logic, and essentially signed off on it. Only then do we get to the final stage. Stage 5. Teach.
Precisely. Only once the AI-generated output has been validated through that explicit audit process can it be confidently approved for use in actual instruction. This validated output could then be reused to create updated PME lecture materials, generate meticulously sourced case studies for analysis, design complex scenarios for war games that are guaranteed to align with specific doctrinal points, or even become part of student-facing learning modules or readings.
But the key is that output is considered provisional, maybe even untrustworthy, until a qualified human has audited its provenance and verified its claims against the authoritative sources.
That's the core discipline. The workflow deliberately forces the AI to function primarily as a highly efficient, highly accurate research assistant and synthesis engine. But it absolutely mandates that human experts retain the ultimate intellectual control, the editorial authority, and the final responsibility for the content used in teaching.
Okay, this 5-stage workflow, curate, retrieve, cite, audit, teach is incredibly rigorous. But implementing something like this, making it practical for instructors and students, that requires a clear roadmap, right? How do you actually use this pipeline to teach specific skills?
Exactly. Theory and workflow are one thing. Classroom application is another. The source material proposes what it called a pedagogical crosswalk to bridge this gap.
A pedagogical crosswalk, what is that exactly?
Think of it as a practical blueprint, or maybe a translation guide. It takes those abstract concepts we reframed earlier, epistemic noise, nonlinearity, tacit knowledge, even auditability itself, and connects them directly to specific AI tools or mechanisms within this framework. And then it maps those tools to concrete skill outcomes that PME students should develop, and suggests specific methods for assessing whether the students have actually achieved those outcomes.
Ah, okay, so it makes the whole thing actionable for an instructor designing a course or a lesson. It answers the question, why am I using this AI tool? What skill does it build? And how do I know if the student learned it?
Precisely. It provides that clear line of sight from the underlying theory through the AI tool to the desired learning objective and the assessment. Let's look at the specific examples provided in the sources because they really illustrate how this works in practice.
Great, let's start with the first reframed concept, friction, which was reframed as epistemic noise. What's the proposed AI tool or mechanism paired with that?
The tool suggested is corpus-restricted query expansion.
Query expansion. What does that mean here?
It means a student can ask a question about a specific topic, say the rules of engagement in a particular scenario. The AI, constrained to the curated version doctrine, doesn't just give one answer. It expands the query to retrieve all potentially relevant and possibly conflicting or ambiguous doctrinal points related to that topic from across the corpus.
So instead of hiding the complexity, it deliberately surfaces the areas where the doctrine might be unclear or where different rules might seem to clash. It exposes the noise.
Exactly. It's designed to reveal the seams, the ambiguities, the areas where the official guidance might be fuzzy or require significant interpretation. It highlights where the epistemic noise is loudest within the doctrine itself.
Okay, so the AI tool helps find the friction points in the knowledge base. What's the intended skill outcome for the student using this tool?
The desired skill is diagnosing uncertainty. Students learn to use the tool not just to find answers, but to identify where the reliable answers end. They learn to recognize ambiguity, pinpoint potential contradictions, and anticipate where established doctrine might be insufficient, requiring judgment calls. They're learning to spot the friction.
And how would you assess if a student has developed that skill, the ability to diagnose uncertainty?
The suggested assessment method is scenario critique
Scenario critique, why that specifically?
because it forces synthesis and judgment. You give the student a complex scenario, maybe a challenging peacekeeping operation with unclear mandates. They use the query expansion tool to pull all the relevant, possibly contradictory doctrinal guidance. Then, they have to write a critique explaining why a standard by-the-book solution might fail in this specific context, based explicitly on the documented ambiguities or conflicts they found using the AI. They have to justify their diagnosis of uncertainty using the traceable outputs from the tool.
Okay, that makes sense. They use the AI to find the noise, then use their own analysis to explain its implications. All right, let's move to the second concept. Nonlinearity, reframed as feedback across cognitive layers. What's the tool for tackling that kind of complexity?
For nonlinearity, the suggested tool is knowledge graph visualization.
Knowledge graphs, so visual maps of connections.
Exactly. Complex systems with lots of feedback loops and potential cascading effects are notoriously difficult to understand just by reading linear text. A knowledge graph can visually map the relationships between different concepts, decisions, entities, and potential outcomes described in the doctrine.
So it could show, for example, how a decision about logistics, cognitive layer 1, might impact unit morale layer 2,
Yeah.
which then affects combat effectiveness, layer 3, potentially creating an unexpected feedback loop.
Precisely that kind of mapping. It helps students visualize those complex, often hidden interdependencies and potential ripple effects that define nonlinear systems. How a seemingly small choice here can lead to a major unintended consequence over there, maybe much later.
And the skill outcome you're aiming for with this visualization tool.
It's systems thinking, the ability to move beyond linear cause and effect and see the interconnectedness of the whole system, understanding how different parts interact, influence each other, and lead to emergent, sometimes surprising, overall behavior.
How do you assess systems thinking? That seems harder to measure.
The proposed assessment method is concept mapping.
Concept mapping. So students have to draw their own map.
Essentially, yes. After using the AI visualization tool to explore the connections with the doctrine for a given topic or scenario, the student would then be tasked with creating their own concept map for a new, related problem. They'd have to manually map out the key elements, the relationships, the potential feedback loops, demonstrating that they understand the systemic structure and the potential cascading effects. If they miss a critical dependency or a feedback loop in their own map, it shows they haven't fully grasped the nonlinearity.
Okay, using one map to learn, then building their own to demonstrate understanding. Got it. Now for the trickiest one. Task knowledge, reframed as the bridge between explicit data and professional intuition. How on earth can an AI tool facilitate something that's defined by being unwritten?
This is subtle, but important. The AI tool here is semantic clustering of doctrines.
Semantic clustering. We heard about semantic search earlier. What does clustering do?
Semantic clustering uses advanced algorithms to find and group together passages from across the entire curated corpus that are conceptually similar in meaning, even if they don't share obvious keywords. It looks for underlying thematic connections. So, for instance, it might identify and cluster together. A passage from Clausewitz discussing moral forces, a section from a modern field manual on building unit cohesion, a historical account detailing a specific instance where leadership significantly impacted battlefield outcomes, and maybe even a doctrinal bit on psychological operations.
So the AI isn't generating tacit knowledge. It's finding patterns in the explicit data that seem to relate to topics where tacit knowledge and human judgment are usually crucial, like leadership, morale, intuition.
Exactly. It surfaces constellations of related ideas scattered across the formal doctrine and theory. The AI finds the patterns in the explicit text that point towards the importance of the tacit dimension. The patterns themselves are the stimulus.
Okay, so the AI provides the stimulus. What's the skill outcome? It can't be developed tacit knowledge, can it?
No, you can't directly teach intuition. The desired skill outcome is reflective practice. The tool provides the clustered insights from the explicit data, but the student's task is then to reflect on those connections. What do these clustered ideas drawn from diverse sources imply about the nature of leadership, or morale, or decision-making under pressure? How does this relate to their own experiences or observations? It prompts them to think critically about the intangible aspects of their profession, using the AI surface patterns as a starting point for deeper personal reflection. It's not about regurgitating the data clusters.
And how do you assess that? How do you grade reflective practice?
This is where the human element becomes absolutely central again. The suggested assessment method is an instructor debrief.
A conversation, basically.
Yes. The student might prepare a short reflection paper based on the AI clusters, but the real assessment happens in a structured conversation with an experienced instructor. The instructor probes the student's thinking, challenges their interpretations, assesses the depth and quality of their reflection on what those patterns mean for professional judgment. They're assessing the quality of the human intuition sparked by the AI's analysis.
That makes sense. The AI provides the prompt. The human instructor evaluates the human response. Okay, one more concept in the crosswalk, auditability itself. You're saying the framework treats the ability to audit as a skill to be taught.
Yes, absolutely. It's not just a background process. It's framed as a core competency for operating in this information environment. The specific AI tool mechanism here is the version retrieval logs.
The audit trail we discussed earlier.
Exactly. The system transparently maintains and makes accessible the history of every query, every chunk of text retrieved by the AI, every source cited in generating an output, along with the version information for the corpus used.
And the skill outcome you want students to develop by engaging with these logs.
It's source discipline, rigorous attention to the provenance and reliability of information, understanding why traceability matters.
And the assessment method seems straightforward here.
It is. A citation trace check. Students might be required, perhaps periodically or for specific assignments, to take an AI-generated output and manually trace back its key claims through the logs to the original source documents. Verify the chain of evidence themselves. This does two things. It ensures they understand how the system works and builds trust in its outputs when they are verified. But more importantly, it turns what could be seen as a technical compliance task into a hands-on pedagogical exercise in critical thinking and information literacy. It reinforces the importance of verifying claims, regardless of whether the source is human or machine. It builds good intellectual habits for future commanders.
This intense focus on auditability, on traceability, really seems to put the ethical considerations front and center in this framework. It feels like it was designed with ethics and accountability baked in from the beginning, not added as an afterthought.
That's definitely the impression given by the source material. It argues strongly that any AI system used in a high-stakes environment like PME must meet certain core ethical criteria to be considered trustworthy and responsible. The framework is explicitly designed around three pillars.
Three ethical pillars, what are they?
They are traceability, reproducibility, and accountability.
Okay, we've talked a lot about traceability, being able to follow every claim back to its specific source. That seems clear. What about reproducibility? Why is that so vital, specifically in military education?
Reproducibility is crucial for fairness, consistency, and institutional learning. It means that if two different students or two different instructors working at different times use the same version of the curated corpus and provide the AI with the same prompt or query, they should receive the same essential set of traceable evidence and fundamentally the same analysis, allowing for minor variations in phrasing, perhaps.
Ah, so it prevents the AI from giving wildly different answers depending on who's asking or when?
Exactly. It ensures a standardized, reliable learning environment. It helps prevent biases creeping in based on how the AI happens to be feeling that day, metaphorically speaking. It ensures that the educational foundation remains consistent, verifiable, and fair. And it's crucial if you ever need to go back and understand why a certain piece of instructional material was generated, you can reproduce the conditions.
Makes sense. Consistent, reliable, fair. Okay, the third pillar, accountability. This seems like the absolute bedrock. The framework insists the human remains responsible. How does it drive that point home?
It uses a very powerful and deeply ingrained military principle as an analogy. The principle of command responsibility.
Command responsibility, okay.
In the military, a commander is ultimately legally and morally responsible for everything their unit does or fails to do. Even if they delegated a task, even if they weren't personally present, the responsibility rests with them.
Right. The buck stops here.
Precisely. The AI framework explicitly applies this same principle to the use of AI in education and analysis. The AI can assist, it can perform complex analysis, retrieve relevant data, even help generate draft content. But the instructor using the material, the student submitting the work, the commander making a decision based on the analysis remains fully and solely accountable. Accountable legally, professionally, ethically for the final output and how it's used.
So the AI is positioned strictly as a tool, like a very advanced calculator or research assistant, perhaps. It's never framed as an independent author, a co-pilot, or a decision maker in its own right.
Never. The human retains that full burden of professional judgment and the full weight of responsibility. That clear, bright line is what the sources argue makes this framework ethically sound and operationally viable for high-stakes military applications. The accountability stays firmly human-centered.
Okay. Now, the framework doesn't just talk about accountability as a rule. It seems to find an unexpected benefit in the process of ensuring accountability. Specifically, that audit stage we discussed. It's framed not just as checking the AI's homework, but as something more.
Yes, this is a really interesting and quite clever aspect. The act of auditing the AI's outputs, tracing those citations, checking the logic, it's positioned not merely as a burden, a necessary chore for compliance. It's framed as a valuable, practical exercise in what the Thors calls decision hygiene.
Decision hygiene, I like that term, like mental hygiene, but for
Yeah.
making choices.
That's the idea. It's about cultivating good habits of mind when dealing with complex information and making judgments. The process of auditing the AI forces the user, whether it's an instructor vetting material or a student checking an AI-generated analysis, to engage in a really detailed, critical examination of the information chain.
So by making you check the AI's reasoning, you're actually practicing how to check any reasoning, including your own.
Exactly. You're constantly asking, does this claim actually follow from this evidence? Is this source credible? Is the logic sound? Are there hidden assumptions here? Is this interpretation valid?
And what specific cognitive pitfalls or bad habits is this decision hygiene exercise designed to combat in the user?
The sources suggest it directly pushes back against common biases. Things
Like,
like confirmation bias, only looking for evidence that supports your existing view, source drift, losing track of where information originally came from, and general intellectual complacency, just accepting an answer because it sounds plausible or comes from an authoritative-seeming source like an AI.
so instead of passively accepting the AI's output, the audit process forces active, critical engagement.
It forces rigor. The student or instructor has to rigorously question how and why the AI arrived at its conclusion. They have to become detectives, tracing the evidence. This process, repeated over time, inherently strengthens their own analytical skills, improves their source discipline, and makes them better at detecting logical fallacies or weaknesses in any complex argument or plan, whether it was generated by a machine or another human.
So it turns the auditing requirement into a skill builder for critical thinking itself.
Precisely. It makes them better, more discerning consumers and producers of information by demanding they meticulously verify the chain of reasoning. It's essentially weaponizing the necessary audit process to combat that cognitive friction, that fog of information abundance we talked about earlier. It cleans up the decision-making process.
Okay, so as we pull all these threads together, the communication gap, the reframing of friction, the five-stage pipeline, the pedagogical crosswalk, the ethical grounding, what would you say is the primary overall contribution of this framework as presented in the source material?
I think the core contribution is the creation of that repeatable bridge, as we called it earlier. A structured, verifiable, and reliable methodology for connecting two, often disconnected worlds. The world of rigorous academic scholarship on military affairs and the world of practical, professional military education and training.
And it's a bridge built not just on good intentions, but on a specific auditable process.
Exactly. The methodology itself is the bridge, ensuring that information flows between these worlds in a way that maintains integrity and accountability. And this rigorous workflow, according to the sources, offers distinct advantages for all the key groups involved in PME.
Right, let's recap those benefits for the different stakeholders. Starting with the researchers, the academics who are generating the original theories and models. What's in it for them?
For researchers, this framework provides something quite valuable. An unprecedented level of control and transparency for studying how their theories actually get applied or interpreted in a pedagogical setting. It offers a structured, almost experimental design. They can see how their concepts, when processed through this constrained AI and curated doctrine, are translated into teachable units. They get feedback on the applicability or interpretation of their models that is directly traceable back to specific doctrinal sources and specific AI interactions. It provides an auditable testbed.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the PME instructors, the ones on the front lines, needing to deliver effective training, often under tight time constraints?
For instructors, the major benefit is gaining a trusted and potentially significantly accelerated workflow for developing high-quality teaching materials. They can generate lesson plans, case studies, scenario elements that are demonstrably aligned with current approved doctrine and do so much more efficiently than starting from scratch every time. But, and this is key, they can do this without feeling like they're outsourcing their intellectual authority or professional judgment to an opaque black box.
Because they can always perform the audit, they can check the AI's work.
Precisely. They can verify every claim, trace every citation back to the source. The AI serves their instructional mission. They're not merely facilitators for the AI. It enhances their capability while preserving their control and responsibility.
Okay. And finally, arguably the most important group, the students, the future commanders and military professionals who need to internalize this knowledge and apply it under pressure. How does this framework benefit them?
For students, the big shift is that this transforms AI from being potentially just a sophisticated way to find answers quickly or maybe even cheat into a transparent learning partner. Because they are involved in the process, potentially even doing some of the auditing or citation tracing, it forces critical engagement. They have to think about how the answer was generated, not just what the answer is. They engage more deeply with the source material itself, the doctrine, the theory, because they see exactly where the AI is pulling it from.
So by having to understand and potentially verify the AI's reasoning process, they move beyond rote memorization.
Yes. They move into mastering the process of analysis, synthesis, and critical evaluation of information. They learn source discipline, systems thinking, how to diagnose uncertainty, the very skills highlighted in the pedagogical crosswalk. It fosters a much deeper level of learning.
This focus on verifiable synthesis, on understanding the process, brings us back one last time to that core concept of friction. The sources offer a final, quite provocative interpretation of friction's role, shifting it from just being a problem.
That's right. It's a really powerful concluding thought in the material. Friction, particularly the epistemic noise variety encountered within this framework, is reconceptualized. It's not merely an obstacle to be eliminated or smoothed over. Instead, friction acts as a crucial diagnostic signal.
A diagnostic signal. What does that signal diagnose?
It signals the inherent limits, the limits of the models, the inevitable incompleteness of any codified doctrine, the gaps in the explicit data that no amount of processing can fill. When the AI, operating under these strict constraints of curate, retrieve, and cite, runs into significant epistemic noise when it struggles to find a single, clear, unambiguously supported answer from the approved sources, when its audit trail reveals contradictions or ambiguities.
That friction point isn't a failure of the system.
It's actually a success. That friction point precisely highlights the boundary. It pinpoints the exact area where the explicit rules and data end and where uniquely human capabilities, professional judgment, intuition, experience, maybe even ethical reasoning, that tacit knowledge become absolutely indispensable.
Wow, so the friction tells the user, warning, model ends here, engage human brain.
That's a great way to put it. It uses the limitations of the technology to rigorously define and highlight the necessity and the unique value of human expertise and skill in complex situations. It shows the student or the commander exactly where their personal contribution is most critical.
That's a profound way to integrate AI, using it to clarify the boundaries of its own competence and thereby reinforcing the importance of human judgment.
Yeah, the author explicitly positions this entire framework not as a final answer, but as a translational prototype, a robust starting point, a model designed to invite further rigorous experimentation in how we teach and learn in high-stakes fields in a way that ensures accountability and human values are designed in from the very beginning, not bolted on as an afterthought. Hashtag outro.
Well, this has certainly been a deep dive. We've explored how principles like transparency, rigorous traceability, and deliberate constraints might unlock the real verifiable potential of AI, particularly in critical areas like military education. I think the central takeaway, maybe for any field considering AI and high-stakes knowledge work, has to be this. The greatest power might not lie in just letting AI generate freely, but in harnessing its ability for disciplined, verifiable retrieval and synthesis of trusted authoritative knowledge.
Absolutely. Those constraints, that structured workflow, curate, retrieve, cite, audit, teach it. They aren't just technical features. They seem to be the very mechanisms that build intellectual trust and maintain professional integrity when dealing with complex and sensitive information.
So, as we wrap up, we want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to chew on, something that builds directly on the source material we've discussed today. If the argument holds true, if Clausewitzian friction really has shifted its center of gravity from the physical battlefield to the cognitive fog of information abundance, then how could the core principles of this PME framework, particularly that intense focus on traceability and citation fidelity, be applied more universally? Think beyond the military.
Yeah, how could these ideas be used in other high-stakes, complex domains, maybe areas like regulatory compliance or complex engineering design processes, or even medical diagnostics and treatment planning?
Could implementing similar auditable workflows demanding that level of source verification improve what we call decision hygiene across the board, in business, in science, in policymaking?
Where in your own work or your organization's work is there a reliance on complex information synthesis that feels a bit opaque? Where could a clearer audit trail, a stronger demand for verifiable sources, actually lead to better professional judgment and more reliable outcomes?
Something to definitely mull over. We hope this deep dive has given you valuable insights and plenty to think about.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and keep learning.